absolutely.
Hello everyone. May I have your attention, please? So, thanks for everyone for coming to the ASIC seminar series. This is the first one this fall. And we, for those who are not familiar with our seminar series, we hold weekly seminars when the school begins. And most of our seminars go virtual since COVID. And I believe this fall we will have like 3 in-person seminars and another 10 virtual seminars. So please stay tuned. And this seminar, every seminar, it will be recorded, and we will post the seminar video on the YouTube channel. And so also after the presentation, we'll have the Q&A session. So please bring up any questions you may have. And today we are honored to have John Slaughter, the director and UMD's UAS Center. So I just read through the speaker's bio, and he has a fabulous resume, so I'm going to read through it very quickly. So Speaker John Slaughter received his bachelor's degrees in '83 and was immediately commissioned into the U.S. Navy from the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps and UC Berkeley. And following the flight school, he flew numerous aircraft, accumulated over 4,000 flight hours. And then he served in the Naval Aviation Acquisition role and lead procurement of the MH-60S helicopter. And was military director of the System Engineering Department and the Naval Air System Command. And then since 2012, he joined a small business, and under his leadership, he grew the business by a lot from the 15 million to over 50 million in terms of the annual revenue. And since August 2022, he joined UMD as a director of the unmanned Uncrewed Aircraft System Research and Operation Center. So today he is going to give us some briefing about the UMD's UAS. So let's welcome the speaker.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, I tend to wander around, also maybe do a little bit of that. But anyway, so as just to kind of get started, this is what I've got in here. We'll talk about a little bit, a little bit of background on drones. I never know what the background of the audience is. So if you know this stuff already, just put up with it and we'll try to get through that. And we'll talk about who we are, what we do at the UROC, and then some of the projects, we've done in the past, and also some of the things that we have going on now. I'm going to run through some of the equipment we have that's most notable, I think, for potential use by researchers, and then areas, perhaps we could find some collaborations. So just first off, you just heard about me. So I was a Navy helicopter pilot, as mentioned. Spent some time in naval aviation acquisition, in flight test world, and also in systems engineering, and then some time in industry. And then about 3 years ago, joined the University of Maryland. So anyone in here uses drones or in their work and just for fun, anything like that? Yeah, got a few of you. Okay. Anyone here a certified drone pilot, Part 107? You're familiar with that? Okay. Commercial? Yep. Okay. You've used them then, just generally speaking, in commercial setting, in research settings, or how have you used them? Different ways. Okay. And then really, I would ask if anyone's been using drones, they've got any experiences. We don't have to hold our questions to the end, but certainly jump in at any time and ask. So what are the things? So first of all, you've got the aircraft, right? The air vehicles, that's the thing we all see. But also very important parts of these systems, and none of them are complete without the data links, the ground stations, and then most importantly, really, in a lot of ways, there's a human in the loop in virtually all these systems. Although we're pushing towards autonomy, still, there's still always a human in the loop. There's somewhere or a human on the loop. So they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. So these are some of what we operate, but so the, multicopters, you're all familiar with them. You've seen probably plenty of multicopters out there. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, everything from little tiny ones you can hold in the palm of your hand up to this. That one's around 55 pounds. Can be run on batteries or gasoline hybrid, a gas electric hybrid setup. Single rotor helicopter configuration, kind of rare, but they do have their place. Fixed wing. So this is a pusher variety fixed wing, use the runway, like gather from the wheels that you see there. Called a penguin. That's about 12 foot of wingspan there. And then this is the twin to that is designed to take off and land vertically. If you notice the booms with vertical takeoff motors, those are electric motors and a gasoline pusher. So come in a lot of different shapes. And these are just the size groupings that you'll hear and see drones broken up into. Most of what you'll see out there is going to be in that group 1 and group 2 area. That is under 55 pounds. Under the rules that exist in the US today, that qualifies as what the Federal Aviation Administration calls a small UAS. And that is far, far easier to operate in the National Airspace System than anything bigger than that. You can do that under the rules pretty freely. So why use them? We always talk about the 3Ds for drones: dull, dirty, and dangerous work. So they're really good at things that oftentimes people are really bad at. I was a helicopter pilot. I spent my fair share of time looking for things in the water and on the ground, flying patterns that were attempting to, be very, very uniform, mowing the grass up and down, back and forth, right? Searching for people, things in the water. That's tough. People get bored. People lose their focus. Drones are really good at this. They can fly a pattern like that essentially perfectly. They don't miss things. They don't miss spaces. Dirty, getting in. A great example of Fukushima, when the reactor was flooded in Japan, using drones to get into a dirty environment like that to inspect and to see what's going on in there. And then dangerous work, pretty obvious there. Certainly a research area that you might be interested in is volcanoes, and so getting up close to something like that might be a dangerous environment where a drone could fit. So they're really good at aerial sensing, all sorts of things you could put on there for payloads. We typically think of cameras and, maybe infrared cameras, but also whether those are magnetometers, could be ground penetrating radar. There are all kinds of things that could be hung on a drone and integrated to it and used as a payload. And then, getting perspectives, that's what we generally do when we're thinking of cameras, is just to get perspectives on things we can't get any other way. So really they're great tools, but they're not the focus of the research. And they can be a pretty big distraction sometimes for the research. These things have oftentimes closed proprietary systems. So, they've got their own software they're running. They may even be variants on things that you've heard of, out there, like, PX4, for instance, but, or, ArduPilot or something like that. But the problem is that often, if you've got a DJI drone, you're not going to get in there and get into that software and integrate anything with it really easily. Quality control, one of the things that we find in the drone world is that a lot of these systems are a lot less reliable than one would like. And so they crash. They just do. They fall out of the sky, often for no discernible reason. And so you got to be aware of that. Choosing the right stuff can be challenging. There's legal concerns. One of the big ones now is around DJI, Autel, other primarily Chinese produced drones, particularly in the light of the last that NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2024. Those are really putting a cramp in it because those are really good systems. They work great. They're really well priced. and, they're pretty easy to use, and they do a lot of things very, very, very well. But they are part of the legal environment that we're having to work through. And then the regulatory environment can also make it pretty challenging. To do things right, to do things legally, there's a pretty good body of very, complicated and sometimes confusing regulations that you really kind of got to navigate. So the airspace over our heads, it may look clear to look up, but if you look at an aerial chart, you'll see that's pretty complicated out there. You probably all know that around here in College Park, you can't fly drones at all very easily. You got to get special waivers here, but there's a lot of different kinds of airspace around the country, and they have different rules. Operators are regulated, so can you go out and buy one of these things at Best Buy and go fly it? Sure, yeah, you can, and that's perfectly legal. Nothing wrong with that. Once you start doing things, but you get paid to do it, then the whole world changes in terms of the legalities of that, and you need to make sure you're doing all that correctly. And then the equipment itself, whether, size is the most obvious, but also things like speed, things like what you're carrying, where you're flying that equipment is really, really important. Okay. There are a lot of rules about what you can and cannot fly over. And rules are going to become even more stringent as time goes by, not less. You all remember what happened last year up around New Jersey and all the flailing that went on around that. Well, that has downstream impact. Takes a while, but it's coming. So what's going on right now in drone world? To just throw a few things up here. So FAA and NASA have long worked together on moving this technology forward, and that hasn't stopped. The big thing that's going on for us right now is beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS. So that is the work that you see going on with drones today. Generally speaking, you got to have eyes on the drone as the operator, or perhaps an observer standing right next to you, where they can have their hand on your shoulder and tell you what they see in the air. That's because the drone has to get out of the way of any manned aircraft out there, and that's the way FAA has said you can do it. So to fly beyond the visual line of sight of that operator today requires waivers to the rules. Getting that waiver can be pretty challenging if you're going to do this legally. Part 108 is part of the Federal Aviation Regulations. That is in review right now. So there is a proposed rule, Part 108, on the street today. It's been out for 30 days so far of a 60-day public comment. And at that conclusion, they'll take back in, adjudicate those comments. They owe us a final rule early next year. That is going to lay out how you can do these beyond visual line of sight operations more cleanly without getting waivers to rules. But they're really oriented towards a couple audiences. The biggest one is commercial drone delivery. So if you've been anxiously awaiting getting drones to drop pizzas on your doorstep, that is not so far away, okay? There's been a lot of work going on in that area commercially. Public operations, so drones as first responders is another area here. Montgomery County has a really model program there, for example, where, oftentimes they will get a drone to the scene of a 911 call before officers even arrive, so they know what's going on before they get there. They could be, properly prepared for that. But there will be a lot more of that made practical. I mentioned the commercial and public operations just then. So delivery ops are scaling up. So there's been pilot projects going on with drone delivery for a long time. There are a lot of folks out there that'll do one-off. They got a drone and they can drop stuff off. Amazon Prime Air has been working on this for years and years. Walmart is really pushing forward in this space. They don't fly their own. They don't make their own. They hire companies. Google Wing is one of them. Zipline is another, if you've ever heard of Zipline. Drone Up for a long time was working with them. And so Walmart has been leading a really big pilot project with FAA coordination down in the Dallas area for the past few years. They just announced 6 new major metros. And so they're really pushing out on drone delivery. And then the development of large UAS and electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that can carry passengers is also moving along pretty quickly. And so the regulations around that are a lot less clear, but those crewed aircraft with pilots on board really operate like other small aircraft. So they'll be able to fly those pretty soon. If you've seen any of the news around about Joby or Archer Aviation, or maybe Beta Technologies. So this stuff's getting pretty close. And we'll see the ability to move larger packages, larger cargoes. There's a lot of work going on around organ transplant, moving organs around with these kinds of air vehicles and so forth. And then finally, right now in the state, we've got something going on called the Maryland Advanced Air Mobility Council. And this was formed in January by an executive order to try to give governor more recommendations on how we're going to get the state ready for this technology as these large-scale drone deliveries beyond the drones as first responders, these larger UAS, the electric manned aircraft start showing up. How do you get ready for that? Because you need to do it, or else you wind up with scooters scattered all over the sidewalks, tripping you up, and you don't want to do that with aircraft. So who are we? I'm going to move on now to the UROC. So we are part of the Aerospace Engineering Department. The history goes back to 2014 when FAA, by Congress's direction, ran a competition nationwide for what they called their UAS test sites. So this organization was part of one of the winning organizations. There were 6, called the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership. It also included Virginia Tech and Rutgers. It kind of crumbled apart not too long after the awards and after things got going. And my organization, the UAS test site, continued on as an independent body in the Aero Engineering Department and has been working that way ever since. So we're down at the St. Mary's County Airport. If anybody knows where St. Mary's County is, took me an hour and 20 minutes to get here this morning. So that's pretty good. That was with no beltway disasters. And so we're kind of right down 5. If you see 5 as you go past Andrews Air Force Base, you just kind of drive down there until you get down into the Solomons, St. Mary's County area, and the airport sits there real close to the Naval Air Station at Pax River. So we have staff of a few engineers, some operators, and then a little bit of supporting staff, myself being one of them. But what I always like to point out is we are an asset of the university. All of our equipment belongs to the university. We're all staff employees of the university, and we like nothing better than to work with faculty researchers to do projects. So that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about here. So the engineers, we have 4 engineers right now. They're all have slightly different expertise and specialties all around aerial robotics. So all the way from really purely software focused with a real focus around autonomy and working with the robotics faculty up around here and students that are working in robotics to just been building drones. The guy's just been building drones since he can remember, doing radio controlled aircraft, and knows this industry backward and forward and knows the technology backward and forward from a mechanical. And then a couple engineers that kind of fill gaps between those 2 extremes, the software that marries up that autonomy and other research software to the flight control software, and then also the taking that flight control software then and running the aircraft. So we stay plugged in on all of the latest rule changes on what's going on with the laws on drones and what are the developments around the community. So that helps us out a lot too. Our pilots have been doing this for a long time. We have 3. So I've got an operations director who kind of oversees that whole the group, the engineers and the operators. And he's a pilot himself, has been around the drone delivery space for quite a few years, commercial drones over in Europe and so forth. And then 2 others who are graduates of UAS programs with bachelors in aerospace, or I'm sorry, in aviation, and been flying drones for thousands of hours each, all kinds of different models. Basically, if you name it, they probably know it. And then flexibility, that's where we kind of really stand out. Whereas the things you buy off the shelf for aircraft are going to have been designed to do a specific thing. We can modify, we can build, and we can do things in creative ways. So where are we physically? That if you can read that map, we're right down here at St. Mary's County Airport. We're right now standing up here in the DC metro area, and these areas are kind of home for us down here. But we've been all over the world. So we operate around here in Maryland primarily, but we've been all over the United States and all over the world, frankly. Most recently been up in Nome, Alaska in the middle of winter. We've been down to Australia and New Zealand doing some projects affiliated with satellite payloads. And so we've been all over the place. So what do we do? First off, the research and engineering missions. So getting things up in the air with that expertise that I've described, and providing that so that faculty, so that researchers, so the students can focus on what they're really trying to do research on. And generally speaking, the research needs data, and we're using drones to get it. Well, rather than worry about the tool you're going to use to gather the data, work with us. We can help you get the right kind of data, find the right systems, find the right aircraft, and then marry up the payloads if it's payload based. Working with undergrads, yep, we do some of that stuff too. Talk about a little bit of that as we go. We are not educators. We don't teach and participate in granting degrees, but we certainly work quite a bit with undergrad students. Then we do operational flight support. This is going to be NASA, NOAA, Homeland Security, Department of Agriculture, the Army, the Navy, a lot of federal agencies that we've worked with over the years, state agencies, sometimes locals. And then private industry, everything from, one-man show with a drone, they want to get it tested for airworthiness and make it fly better, up to working on projects where we have contracts with Lockheed's, SAIC's, Booz Allen, the big companies of the world, and then lots of things in between. And then we have a couple of initiatives of our own that we're leading with our own grants. One is this Chesapeake UAS route network project. The concept behind this is how can we help to lead in getting larger drones into the airspace over Maryland, and being able to then move things around the state, long range, beyond visual line of sight, larger drones. And then Eastern Shore Medical Delivery Project. This is funded with a U.S. Department of Transportation grant called a SMART grant, looking at using advanced technologies to solve transportation challenges. In our case, transportation gaps in rural communities, looking at how we might be able to help with public health issues related to the difficulty that people can have getting their prescriptions, getting their medicines, staying on their treatment programs, and staying healthy. And so that one's ongoing now as well. Like next week, we'll be over in Crisfield on the Eastern Shore, doing some demonstrations for the week of drone delivery of medical or prescriptions and so forth. So just to kind of delve into this a little bit more, I already mentioned focusing on the research, not the tool. So we have a lot of equipment. I'm going to talk about some of that here in a bit. And we also can, help you choose equipment if nothing that we have is suitable and you're not quite sure. We're happy to do that. Modifying hardware, modifying flight software. We can put payloads on of all sorts and have often done that, and to operate in a lot of different kind of environmental conditions. And then again, I'll just kind of thump on this one again, but making sure it's all being done legally and in accordance with the rules. If we can get engaged, if we have occasionally done these projects and we'll engage with the researchers as they're writing grant proposals, we can get engaged early, that can oftentimes really smooth progress later on. And that's something I also saw in my DoD career. The earlier you get operators in the mix and figuring out your requirements, the better. So just a couple examples of some of those research projects. This was 2019. Some of you may remember it, but this was the first ever transport of a human organ using drones. This was done in Baltimore in 2019. So it was about 3.5 mile flight. That was a custom built. We built 2 custom made drones that were from the ground up designed to do this, working with Dr. Joseph Scalia from the School of Medicine up there in Baltimore. So the whole aircraft was dual redundant, everything from motors to rotors to antennas, with a final last ditch ability to deploy a parachute if the thing was to fall out of the sky. And that thing was tracked on the ground by a police car with my predecessor, who would have grabbed it and carried it to the hospital if need be and had to parachute to the ground. But yeah, so that went smoothly. Actually, this thing made it all the way over to the University of Maryland Medical Center and went into a woman who's still with us today. So this is one of the use cases for drones. It's going to be really impactful And those beyond visual line of sight rules I was talking about are going to help to enable this. One we have going on right now that's pretty interesting is called the DARPA Triage Challenge, so the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So they run challenges, as they term them, from time to time. Some of you may be familiar with that. The one they have running right now is around triage. So they want to look at using robots and mass casualties to get robots out quickly to find the casualties and assess them to decide where the medics need to go first. So University of Maryland has a team that's doing really well in this competition. In fact, we're getting ready to go down to Perry, Georgia in 2 weeks for the second round of challenges. And we're using you can see up in the top here, this little guy up here is up. You'll see another picture of it later, but that is a custom drone that was built by us at the UROC, working with other robotics researchers with the little spot dog down here. So those drones then get launched, they fly out, locate victims, and transmit that information to the ground robots, which are able to then go and grab vital signs, respiration, heart rate, that kind of thing. They can communicate with a chatbot, talk to that victim, and then help to upload their position and move on and find the next one and move the medics along. So they're making good progress, highly automated. The idea here is to be human on the loop. So we'll see how that goes this year, but things are looking pretty good. Undergrads, I talked about this. So we work with the student teams on campus. So there are a lot of those, but those are 3 that we specifically work with a lot right now. We have internships, and this is my pitch. If you know an undergrad who's got a technical degree they're working on and has an idea for something that could use a drone, it could be building a drone, but more often than not, it's a payload or some software. Then that we have an open application running on our website. Kids can go in there and upload an application along with a proposal for a project, a letter from a mentor who's willing to support them in that. And then we'll choose our winners sometime in the spring and bring them down to our facility in Southern Maryland for 10 weeks. It's a paid internship. We have a budget for their projects, and we'll do everything we can to get their project up in the air with them by the end of summer. That's just some pictures of some of recent interns and the projects they're working on, both in our hangar and our labs and out in the field. And then I just like to show this video because this is a really cool one it's several years old now, but I still never get bored with it. So, for about $1,000, the student was able to waterproof a drone. You may know that there are a decent number of systems out there that will land in the water and then use a separate propulsion system to move around and then take off and fly back. This challenge was to use the very same rotors it flies with to do that, and was able to do it successfully here in the pool at College Park. So I think that is a pretty cool project, and not bad for 10 weeks in the summertime, right? Back it comes. So then I mentioned operational flight support, so public-private entities. So really our kind of rule of thumb here is if someone's got an idea, whether that be public, whether that be a private company, that's got an innovative research kind of look and focus to it, then we're always happy to talk and see what can we do to help. We're not here to do repetitive services type stuff, but we can be pretty creative, as I mentioned before, and help them get through any kind of regulatory hurdles, any kind of integration challenges they may have. And there's usually a problem or 2 or 3 or 10 along the way, and we can help them work through those things to get their stuff flying. Safety of flight's a big thing for us. In fact, it's kind of our #1 thing. So we are an aviation organization, and we're really explicit about that. One of the things about drones in general is that they tend to be technology driven, and the companies that build them are technology driven. And really the idea that these things fly in the airspace makes them aircraft under the rule, under the law, and you got to deal with it as such. And so that is kind of a conflict. We often, that's why we find things that don't really operate the way they should. They're a little less well built for quality. So we can help with engineering reviews. It's difficult to do it to the kind of level that a commercial airliner is going to do it, because nobody can afford to do that for a small drone. But we've adapted some of the Defense Department's risk analysis and risk mitigation techniques into a risk-based airworthiness system that we do apply, that lets us take a look at aircraft and at least say, okay, what are we going to be doing? Where is the challenge here? How can we mitigate that? Some of the projects we've done in the last couple of years, this was one with NOAA. So they have some payloads flying looking at sea ice. One of the things they were trying to do with those payloads is measure the thickness of sea ice. Don't ask me how. I can't figure it out, but that's what they're doing. And what they're doing to calibrate, validate the measurements they're getting is they got humans running out on the ice and they're drilling holes to figure out how thick that stuff is. That's one of those kind of, by definition, dangerous jobs. And so can we use drones to replace that, was the question, working with the NOAA scientists. And this was a 3-year project, spent about a year in the lab. The second year of that project, they were up on Lake Michigan in the wintertime, flying up there and gathering quite a lot of data. And then the final round is the one you see here. This was up in Nome 2 years ago in January. And flying that is the H6. That's that 55-pound drone I told you about. That is harder than it sounds when it's up there and it's that cold. Those things are not designed to be in that kind of cold. So insulating it, insulating the payload, making sure that all of this stuff is going to operate in those conditions, the batteries, so forth, were all part of the challenge. So we were able to do all the flying successfully. No polar bears needed to lose their lives, although they were ready for that, because this stuff is a truly wild environment out there. The data was successfully gathered. We weren't part of finding out what they did with it, but we got it. So some things that we've got going on right now and some future projects. So Artemis is in its final year now. This is one of these multi-agent projects that, like I told you, with the DARPA triage challenge. So now we have multiple drones working together to go out and locate really something that they have been trained using AI and ML techniques to go find. It's a lot harder than it sounds. They're usually trying to discern a human, from above, with only a couple or 3 pixels to work with. And so then once they've spotted something of interest, to take action autonomously on that data, which means not only to decide what to do, but then feed it through to the flight controls and have the drones do it, and then divide the job up among themselves autonomously as well. And so that's all really kind of about Artemis. We already talked about the triage challenge. We're just engaging in a new project now with this is donor funded, but looking at using groups of drones in kind of a first responder situation. So this gentleman who's funding this is really interested in active shooters and how would you respond in an active shooter scenario on a campus in an urban environment. And so we're looking at this using 5G connectivity to provide the networking, since that's pretty ubiquitous now in those kind of environments. And that's where he made all his money, is around mobile communications. So we're kind of combining the two. High-speed EMS drones. So we're doing a project with a very large company, and we're going to be starting here on a 3-year test campaign to validate something they've been working on kind of undercover for now a couple of years, I guess you might call it, behind the curtain. But at any rate, it's a high-speed emergency medical services focused drone. So they have a trauma kit that could be delivered to a citizen who called in a 911 call for an emergency. Things like an AED, tourniquets, splints, Narcan, EpiPen, all that kind of stuff in that kind of a trauma kit. Also another payload that could carry organs, obviously not an emergency situation there. And then do all this and cover a large swath of space with an extremely fast drone using a lot of novel aero type techniques. It's really a novel aircraft. Also, the propulsion system that they're using is pretty novel in the drone world too. So we're pretty excited about this test program coming up. There's a small startup company right outside campus here, actually right here in the Discovery District somewhere, I think, that's looking at laser power beaming, to provide ongoing power to the drone, keep it up in the air longer. This has been something that people have been pursuing for a long time, but nobody's really made it practical yet. So they've got an Army Small Business Innovative Research grant that they're working on there. And we're also participating with them in a MIPS proposal here very shortly, this go around actually, for that project. And then wildfire is something, using drones in wildfire response is something that has a lot of attention right now. And one of the things the University of Maryland is participating in now, you may have read about, is the Wildfire X Prize. And so that effort has moved forward into the kind of the screening for the semifinal stage. So we're helping with some of the drone related pieces to that project. We got a bunch of other stuff going on too, but those are a few of the highlights. And then integrating UAS into the National Airspace System. So the Chesapeake UAS route network, this is what I talked about with trying to push the envelope to expand their use in the National Airspace System over the skies of Maryland, because that's where we are. But this is that long range beyond visual line of sight. Then the drone delivery of medical supplies, I've already talked about that a little bit. And then Maryland Advanced Air Mobility Council, we're also part of this, helping to get the state ready for what comes next. So what do we got? So we've got quite a bit of existing capability. We've got we have in-house lots of different kinds of cameras, but color and thermal cameras, multispectral, and the ability to do photogrammetry surveys, any of that kind of works, pretty much bread and butter. Payload integrations, we have a number of commercially available systems, but also several that are open systems, so we can really get in and modify those extensively to make them suitable. And then we have custom builds, ground up, built in-house. And for instance, in those multi-agent system projects I was talking about, like DARPA and Artemis and others, that's what we're using there. And so in those cases, this autonomy, we need a lot of edge computing up in the air. And so these things are designed to carry some pretty powerful processors. Right now we're carrying them, Jetson Orion, I think is what we're typically flying. But that can be iterated easily because these have been built from the ground up, as I said, to be open. And so we can do all that hardware and software engineering. So these are just some pictures in our hangar. If you look at that bottom right-hand corner, that's our mobile operations center down there. That has pretty good capability to go out, set up in the field and support operations of, we use it for small drones, just as a place to get in out of the 95-degree Maryland summers sometimes, but also our large Chesapeake UAS route network project. We have some radar systems, some other systems that can be mass mounted on here that can help us to ensure the airspace is clear and we're not going to be running into any manned aircraft. And inside, we've got the pilot stations, the ability for an electronic observer to monitor airspace, and also workspace. We do a lot of the work on the aircraft side as well. So just a sampling of the aircraft we have. So up here in the top corners, this is an Albatross. This was actually just donated to us. It's a pretty nice aircraft. It's the thing's it's got about a 5-pound payload. It is about 4 hours of endurance on electric only. It's runway based, but it can go pretty far. It has a really good high quality electro-optical infrared gimbal, and could be pretty effective for surveying type purposes. Over on the right, this is the Penguin vertical takeoff and landing version that we're using for the Chesapeake UAS route network. So that aircraft just had its first transition out of hover into forward flight last week, and that was very successful for us. Big step. There's a lot of money represented in that thing. So getting it up and successfully flying was a big deal for us, and we're going to be really pushing these next couple of weeks in the beautiful weather. And then hopefully by the end of the fall here, we'll be flying across the bay with that thing. Down at the bottom, we call this is actually this is a Believer. That's a foam aircraft, styrofoam aircraft. They're really cost effective, reasonably priced, long endurance. One of my engineer's pet projects is seeing how much time in the air he can squeeze out of this thing. He's got it somewhere up in the 5-6 hours of endurance range. And it can carry about 3-pound payload. So downward looking sensors. Super flexible, as you might think, from a styrofoam kit aircraft. Then we have multicopters, and we have a lot of others, but these two are really kind of nice workhorses for us. So the big one down here on the bottom, that is a Harris Aerial H6. That thing goes out pretty close to 55 pounds, the max weight that FAA will allow. It's got a payload around 11 pounds. It can be flown either on battery alone, or with time in the air around 30, 40 minutes with that payload, or with a gasoline electric hybrid system. So you're spinning a generator that then powers your motors. You can get around 3 hours of endurance with that if you're okay with a little bit of noise. Over on the other side is what we call the F-11. Picture's a little dark, but that's about a 25-pound aircraft all up, about 5 pounds payload, completely open system. That thing's got a Jetson inside of it as well. The top and bottom of this thing have been designed to facilitate mounting pretty much whatever you might want for payloads, and we can modify it in a lot of different ways. It's pretty well suited for autonomous multi-agent kind of work as well. Bigger than the homegrown aircraft. These are both commercial. And then some custom builds. So down here on the bottom right, that we call that Anaconda. So that Penguin B that we just transitioned into forward flight this last week, we learned all the lessons using this styrofoam aircraft, which one of our engineers modified from another styrofoam kit, put the booms on there so it could take off and land vertically. It is like Penguin. You can't necessarily see it here, but it has an electrically powered pusher motor here. So the configuration is the same as Penguin, running the same software as Penguin, and designed to as closely emulate that as we could. And so worked through a lot of those challenges of tuning the aircraft, lessons learned. It was a good decision because there's one of the pieces of one of these things hanging on the wall. And you just salvage the parts out and put it in another styrofoam body. Over here, that's an example of the Chimera that was flying in that DARPA triage. So that, again, a completely in-house design. One of our engineers, saw the challenges with trying to, force together research efforts with off-the-shelf technology, and said, let's start with a clean sheet and build something that's designed to do research. So this has a lot of edge computing on it. This has any kind of flight controller you want, whatever kind of sensor you want can be easily adapted into it. That version has a gimbal that contains electro-optical, so a color camera, an IR camera, and a laser rangefinder. But we could set it up in a lot of different ways. It's also scalable to a degree, really cheap, relatively speaking. That airframe is just 3D printed, and then carbon fiber tubes, and you can put it together, build it with just hand tools. In 10 years, actually, that will become an open source design once we get the final designs nailed down. And it's running Autopilot, which is open source software as well. So what do we do when we work with people is we help a lot of times get into the airspace. So we have pretty good connections at FAA. We're pretty well known up there. We're working with them on a fairly regular basis. So we can get those waivers to the existing regulations. We know how to do that. We fly up here on campus somewhat frequently. We have really a recurring waiver we put in with FAA, so we can do that. The Navy, we're right in the backyard of the Naval Air Test Center down in Pax River, and we're pretty well connected over there with air traffic control. In fact, we'll be doing a good deal of work in restricted airspace down there over the summer. And so if you really need to keep yourself separated from other air traffic for safety reasons, that's a good way to do it. As well as those waivers to what I call the Part 107, that's the commercial drone rules that exist today. Part 91 is really aircraft in general, aircraft operations in general, not drones. So certificates of authorization and waiver are called COAs. We can get that as a public entity as part of the university. And so we have to certify periodically with FAA via all the lawyers that we are in fact a legitimate public entity, and we are. So that lets you get the ability to, exceed multiple rules at once. A waiver generally is going to let you do one thing that's outside the lines. COA can let you do multiple of those. There's a good deal of work that goes on with getting them, but we have a good deal of experience getting them. And then safety of ops. That's always, as I mentioned before, got to be one of our key elements. So just a few things that are out there that I always like to point out. So topics and note, the 2024 NDAA, covered entities, that's really primarily they were aiming at DJI and Autel and other Chinese drone makers. The DoD has long prohibited using, DoD money to buy or operate those. Only recently has that been extended to other federal agencies. So as of the time that law went on the books in December of 2023, that was a prohibition on federal agencies to spend money to buy those systems, but they could keep using them. As of December this year, the prohibition extends to even using them with federal money. So if you have a project going on, if there's a federal nickel in that project and you're using a drone from one of these manufacturers, that's going to come up against a problem starting on December 22nd. Advanced air mobility is also a pretty big one. You may, I don't know if you follow it, probably don't, but I do. There's an awful lot of drumbeat going on now about these electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. They're moving really fast right now. So Joby, Archer, and Beta Technologies are the three leading U.S. companies. They're really looking at commercial stuff. We're a lot closer to the Jetsons than you might think, really. These have relatively short ranges, but they're also going to be considerably less expensive than other kind of charter aircraft to operate, which potentially opens up routes that are just not economically viable today. So what does that all mean? We may be connecting up the states a lot more different directions, a lot more connections than we're able to do today with aviation. And then again, with the drones and some of the coming rules, we'll be seeing a lot more of them out there as well. So what can we do together? If you've got a project that you use an airborne perspective and, pick up the phone, call us, shoot an email. Happy to give advice, happy to engage in proposals, whatever it takes. But if we've got the right piece of equipment for you, that could save you too. So you can focus your research dollars on the work because we can oftentimes, provide that a lot more cheaply than you're going to find it out there and then spend a lot of your time figuring out how to use it and make it work for you. If you got questions on the rules, always happy to help with that. We want to make sure the airspace is safe. And so, just if you got a question about whether you ought to be doing something in a particular place, happy to help you with that. If you're not sure where to start, because this world's pretty confusing too. If you go out there and look, if you ever tried to go find a drone appropriate to a particular job online, there are a lot of claims being made out there, but a lot of them aren't backed up by much. So there's a lot of good looking websites, put it that way. So we can kind of help you sort through what's real and maybe what isn't. That's kind of the drone maker piece. And then, we can potentially save you some money too, because these assets are owned by the university. We're staff employees of the university, so that the talent can come to, at potentially a discount to what higher end help from outside might be. And then I always want to extend the opportunity. If you want to come see us in person, you're always welcome visits and love to give tours. We've got not just us down there at St. Mary's County Airport, but if you've heard of the Matrix Lab, smart building down there, there's some pretty nice University of Maryland facilities down there, some really nice labs, some pretty unusual capabilities that are worth visiting. And that really concludes my presentation here. You got me. Okay. Anybody's got any questions or anything?
I have so many questions in the queue online. So I think maybe what we'll do is
Went too long.
we'll take turns between in-person and remote and the order in which they were asked, which I think the first question online was asked like 30 minutes ago. So it's a bit of a wait.
Okay.
So Chris, you want to start us off?
Sure.
Thanks very much. That was really neat. What are some of the limitations and specifically weather for flying of drones? I would think heavy downpour, probably not, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, that would be true. These things are not going to be built for that kind of weather. The rules really constrain you to daylight or not daylight, but to visual flight rules operations. So you need to have clear weather. Yeah, so day and night, yeah, but most of them are not going to fare well in a heavy downpour. Some can get through some moisture. It depends.
Okay, yeah, great, thanks.
Thank you. So I'll bump to an online question. We have someone that is curious if your virtual meetings / working group sessions have minutes available online.
Sure.
What specifically? I guess all of them. This person is named Ryan Higgins. Ryan, if you could just reach back out and kind of specifically say what minutes you're interested in. Okay, an in-person question?
So how high and how fast can one go?
Okay, so the rule, the Part 107 rule says 400 feet, says 100 miles an hour. Then that gets to those waivers, you know, and 55 pounds is another very, you know, distinct cutoff. But waivers are available if you need to go through the process. The COAs that I discussed, the certificates of authorization and waiver, could potentially get you, you know, airspace up much higher than that, substantially faster flight than that. So then you start really getting down to working with FAA as to making the case with them that what you're doing is safe. And once you convince them you're going to be safe, they'll give you the authorization to go do it. So that's the COA process.
So theoretically, 10,000 feet is feasible.
It could be done. That's going to be a tough one, but yeah, I mean, it has been done. We've never done it. 10,000.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This person asks, could you elaborate more on the application of drones in wildfire projects? Particularly, how well does the drone operate under heavily smoky conditions? Does the AI autonomy technique really help on navigating through those challenging weather conditions? Thanks.
Okay, so drones in wildfires. So there's a lot of different things people want to do with them. So tracking wildfire spread is a challenge. And so you know, one of the things around wildfire settings is you know, that they're using, and you've seen this, they're using a lot of large manned aircraft to deliver suppressants. So they want to separate the aircraft out and keep them safe from drones. So seeing where the fire is at any given time during the day, they're keeping a pretty good idea of it, but they don't fly at night. And they typically don't allow drones to fly at night. So the fire moves at night and you got to get up in the morning and figure out where it went. So a lot of the technology, a lot of the use of AI that people are thinking of is to try to track the movement of that fire line overnight so that, you know, so that they're not kind of starting each day with, okay, where did it go? How far did it get in the morning? Whether it can dodge smoke and duck in and out, you know, the drone itself isn't, you know, really doesn't care about the smoke per se, but, you know, trying to provide a picture to fire crews on the ground that could potentially be an issue. But there are other things going on too, like the project we're working on, the X Prize. That one involves a challenge to within 10 minutes of a fire sparking up essentially in a wildfire situation in a 10 by 10 kilometer box. And you're supposed to identify the sparking wildfire and get suppressant on it in that 10-minute period. So that is incredibly challenging to do. I don't know that anybody's going to succeed, but X Prizes are supposed to be hard. So what we're working on is kind of some of the part tasks right now, which is delivering suppressant, working with our fire protection engineering department here, as well as Aero and some other departments to try to put that together. So that's one place, you know, where you potentially could deliver suppressant, but you got to do that before the thing really gets big, and it gets big fast. So you got to get to it quickly. So that's another area. Just monitoring what's going on. That's a potential high altitude mission like you're talking about. And the airspace over a wildfire is going to be declared as what they call a temporary flight restriction, meaning, you know, normal civilians can't fly their aircraft into it, which helps to protect the airspace and take away some of the risk. You can kind of layer cake that and set airspace aside for drones. That potentially allows you then to keep surveillance on what's going on a regular basis. So those are some of the areas that drones could be very suitably used in a wildfire kind of situation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any in-person questions?
Yeah, thank you. So in the context of putting an instrument or electronics like the Jetson that you mentioned on a drone, how would the power supply typically be managed, and what are the constraints there?
Yeah, it depends. So some of the systems that you see, like that large multicopter with the gas hybrid system, that has a pretty decent excess amount of power there for running, your optional extras. So we can run some pretty good payloads off of that. Some of the others, like that real big the vertical takeoff and landing Penguin, has surprisingly little excess power available to it. But you can solve it in different ways. Sometimes you can just pull the power off the existing aircraft system. You can add additional batteries, which gets you strangely into some regulatory concerns. And so power can be handled in different ways, but it's weight, and weight's huge in everything with aviation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is it possible to do one complete scan of the College Park campus, all buildings, trees, and ground, with a group of drones carrying thermal cameras? How much would it cost approximately? And how long would it take per full scan?
The real answer to that is I don't know how I'm getting that waiver. So the hard part's regulatory there. So we're inside a 15-mile circle here from Reagan National Airport called the Flight Restriction Zone, the FRZ. And so the waivers that we get to fly on campus are very specific about a spot on the ground we're going to take off and land from. They got, typically less than, about like half a kilometer, maybe radius around that. We've got to tell them generally when we want to do it. You got to tell them which aircraft you're going to fly, who the pilots are, and all of that kind of stuff. And that visual line of sight piece that I was telling you about is 100% in effect. And each aircraft must have an operator assigned to it. So you can't have a drone swarm of several aircraft with one operator in this case. So the regulatory challenges in College Park, really, really hard to do what you want. Technically, not that hard.
Darn. An in-person question?
Actually, I have one. So, given the amazing accomplishment you made in the industry, what prompts you to join UMD and new industry?
Now, this is, so why did I start doing this? Well, like I said, I got to fly helicopters for a long time. I've been around aviation my entire career. My 10 years in industry was a company that was pretty focused around aviation. As part of that, while I was doing the business development, I also ran a small effort to make money using drones, commercial. So we did this for about 3 years. We went out and bought some equipment. We hired some folks, and we tried to make money doing. We had won a contract with the state of Colorado Department of Transportation with their geologists, as a matter of fact, and we were flying some very high-end LiDAR equipment on some pretty expensive drones and getting some incredibly high resolution kind of pictures of all of the road passes going through all those mountains. They got a lot of them, and then the ground moves, as we all are aware, and those rocks fall down on the road. And when it happens, not only is it dangerous, but there's huge economic impact when those things slide. So the geologists there were saying, can we detect movement early enough to perhaps do something about it before that happens? Sadly, they awarded that contract, but they never really got around to spending much money on it. And so we were scrambling to try to make money in other ways using that equipment. And there was a good deal of work we could find, but because of the regulations, it was so costly to do the work that making any money at it just a no-go. And so eventually we had to shut that down. But that was kind of my first. I had been exposed to it during my time in the Navy to UAS in various ways, but that was my first really down into the industry. And so, and then it just so happened, that pure coincidence, that I was talking to somebody I knew when we shut down that company. I helped him get a job here at University of Maryland at the UAS Research and Ops Center with my predecessor. And I was talking to him one day, found out they needed a new director and they were advertising for one. And I said, I'll do that. So it worked out, and it's great, working with these young, really capable engineers and these young, smart pilots I'm just so proud of that team. Anything I give them, they just knock it out of the park. So it's been nothing but good as far as working there. And so I have no regrets, put it that way.
Yeah. I have a couple more. We're a couple minutes over, but I think we started a couple minutes late. So I think maybe we have time for like a couple more questions. I have two here. So is there collaborative research occurring using UAVs, USVs, and UUVs to characterize the ocean surface and submarine environments?
So is that going on? I am pretty sure that's going on. We're not doing it. We haven't been involved with it. So our air to ground has been with ground robots and aerial robots working together. We have done a little bit with unmanned surface vessels. That did another NASA project a few years ago, looking at search and rescue satellite signals. And so we had some USVs for that, but that's not really our specialty. As I was mentioning before, University of Delaware is pretty deep into the surface and a little bit underwater.
Do you have any in-person questions? Yeah.
So, God forbid you have an incident where either someone or something
Yeah.
gets hit. Is that something that's treated as like a University of Maryland incident? Do you go through those channels, or is it something where it's the individual pilot who you would be, treated as responsible for that?
So if we were to have a mishap and, cause damage, so, well, the university, generally speaking, is self-insuring. We also carry aviation liability insurance through an aviation insurer, as well as what's called hull coverage on some of our more expensive aircraft. So the pilot is personally responsible for his or her actions under federal law.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I don't want us to go too far over. I'm going to ask one more online question, then we'll see if we have anything in the room. And we'll finish this up. I don't want to keep you guys too long. If we use the drone, how long ahead of time do we need to propose it? And what's the rate of charge? Any possibility of regular use over an extended period, say 1 or 2 years?
So I'm going to say that all depends. And so if somebody's got an idea and is writing a proposal, if we participate in it, we'll work that out. What we typically do is we get calls like this all the time. Hey, we've got this project. Can you help? I say, yeah, we'll talk about it. I'll talk about anything, and we'll sit down and have a discussion. We'll try to understand what it is that they want to do, whether we have assets on board and capability to help, looking at our schedule. Do we have white space in the calendar? And then we can put together a statement of work and we can generate a cost. So really it's labor primarily for us. The assets are owned. We recoup a little bit on them. So we can be pretty flexible with responding to requests for work.
Thank you. Do we have any in-person questions to close us off? One final question? Okay, that's fine by me. Well, thank you so much, John, for giving us this talk.